But let's take a look at maybe some of the acquisitions, right? The moves, the contract extensions, the player retention, right? We'll call it for Houston Dash in 2022. Probably the biggest, I think, for us, Maria Sanchez from Tigres Femenil, signing a 2-year deal with Houston Dash. They also welcomed Kelsey Hedge from OL Reign, Julia Ashley from Racing Louisville, goalkeeper Ella Diedrich from OL Reign. And there's some prospects in here with Ryan Garris from South Carolina through the NWSL draft. And they also introduced another international signing with Paulina Gramaglia. But, extensions are real big for the offseason as well. And they had a big one with goalkeeper Jane Campbell, who went ahead and gave her a contract extension through 2024. So this was a team that maybe initially kind of looked like they were holding, steady going into that busy week of a transfer window, double expansion draft, and NWSL draft. But ultimately can look back on their offseason and say, hey, these are the players that we are bringing into the fold, the contract extensions. These are the moves that we made. When we're looking at all these, Lisa, which one is standing out to you the most?
Well, adding Maria Sanchez to this roster is a huge standout. We had the pleasure of speaking with her after she signed this 2-year deal with Houston. Her excitement to join the NWSL and her passion for playing this game in America is overwhelming. And I think that her energy, her vibe, her mindset, off the pitch is going to be a huge benefit for Houston to have in the training room, at the practice field. Just someone that wants to be there day in and day out and compete at the highest level that she possibly can. And she wants to make a difference. So Maria Sanchez joining Houston Dash is a huge get. I think she can provide so much to this team on the flank, sending crosses in, dribbling at defenders 1v1. She's very good at that. And she brings her experience from playing in Mexico and at international level to this Houston Dash team, which does have a lot of international players onto it. So adding that into the mix, huge for Houston. When you look at the losses, a lot of losses that Houston faced, I almost would say Abby Dahlkemper, in a sense, was a big loss for Houston. However, she didn't play for very long with the Dash. She was traded from North Carolina towards the end of the 2021 season on like a mini loan to Houston Dash just for a little bit before, technically her rights were traded back to North Carolina, then to San Diego Wave FC. But during her short stint with Houston Dash, she made an impact on the pitch. I think playing alongside Katie Naughton in the center back position and Dahlkemper being able to have her vision on the ball as a center back, split lines, play those long through balls over top, finding her former teammates, then Rachel Daly, Kristie Mewis, Shea Groom up top. It really worked well. However, biggest loss for me for Houston Dash is going to be midfielder Kristie Mewis. She was a lot of movements as well with this player, traded to San Diego Wave FC and then ultimately Gotham FC. So she'll be playing with Gotham in the 2022 season. But Mewis was a player for Houston that was really held a lot of the midfield together, and she could do a lot for this team. When the chips were down and James Clarkson and his squad needed to get some goals, needed to get back in a game, they relied on a player like Kristie Mewis, along with others. But Mewis being one of the veterans to be able to step up with this Houston team, lead. She's so creative and crafty in the midfielder. And when we talked about Gotham, we highlighted her as such a big get for Gotham's, which just equates to being such a huge loss for Houston. And when I look at the roster signing between Maria Sanchez and all the other players and the loss of Kristie Mewis, they don't even each other out, just because Sanchez and Mewis are very different stylistic players. And I think the loss of Mewis and her tenure at Houston Dash is a bit larger than the gain for Maria Sanchez. And that's kind of just looking at these lists. For you, is Kristie Mewis, is there a big hole where she's leaving, or do all of these other names kind of filling in for Houston fill that hole?
I think with some of the acquisitions that they made, we're talking about the midfield specifically, right? And losing somebody like Kristie Mewis.
Mm-hmm.
And then that you wonder like, oh, this is going to leave a really, really big hole. But when we're looking at other players that they brought in, like a Marissa Vigiano, right, to sort of also include as part of that player acquisitions during the offseason to add to that sort of midfield depth. having somebody like a Shea Groom, etc. I'm not too sure if that's gonna be as big as of a glaring hole that maybe folks might be thinking it is. I'm with you 100% in that it is a big loss and probably on paper the biggest loss for Houston Dash. I mean, gosh, I remember us covering this double expansion draft and then sort of seeing these protected player lists and having Kristie Mewis be an unprotected player, right, on that expansion draft. There was absolutely already the chatter like maybe this is a predetermined move, right? And that ended up kind of playing out and coming to fruition. They left her unprotected. San Diego selected her. There was an additional trade to Gotham FC, some allocation money moving in place, right? So Houston ended up, sort of kind of having these discussions, sort of having this sort of predetermined move in place. And I'm with you with Mewis being the bigger of the losses for some of the departures that they had. Don't know if I'm actually 100% in agreement with you about Dahlkemper. I think maybe that was a short-term loan, like you said, maybe an experiment, a roll of the dice, right, for this franchise to try to maybe make a push in that late half of the season. And I don't know if we could sit here and say that it actually panned out for them, considering they found themselves sitting outside of playoff contention. But in terms of that defensive line, having somebody like a Megan Oyster also making her departure. Now Megan Montefusco going to Orlando Pride. It's like a 1-2 punch combo, right? Like you're losing a Dahlkemper and you're losing another center back. So I think that's something that the Houston Dash are going to maybe try to keep an eye on. That's a lot of responsibility, I think, for somebody like a Katie Naughton, right, to sort of take a look at. Why don't we take a look at this roster as a whole? One of our favorite parts about doing these previews, right? We get to talk about the preseason roster at hand, which typically has a ton of players. We've been seeing them from as large as 30 players, 35, but maybe not so much the case here for Houston. This is how they're rolling out with their preseason thus far. For goalkeepers, they've got Jane Campbell, Ella Diedrich, Lindsay Harris. For defenders, they've got 8 with Julie Ashley, Alyssa Chapman, Carly Farquharson, Kennedy Faulkner, Haley Hansen, Liana Hins, Katie Naughton, and Anika Schmidt. For midfielders, they've got 7 listed at Joelle Anderson, Hannah Diaz, Shea Groom, Makame Gomera Stevens, Kelsey Hedge, Emily Ogle, Sophie Schmidt, and Marissa Vigiano. And for forwards, they're running out with 8 with Michaela Abam, Michelle Alozi, Rachel Daly, Rachel Garris, Paulina Gramaglia, Michelle Prince, Maria Sanchez, and Brie Visali. A little bit of a difference there, though, I think, Lisa. I think primarily for Brie Visali, used to be listed as a midfielder.
Yeah.
Now being pushed on this forward line. When we're looking at all of these players throughout the position, when we're trying to think of an ideal starting 11, right, for this Houston Dash side, is it easily accessible? We're like, look, we're going to point out 11 players. Boom, this is who's going to be here on opening day. Or is it more just like, here are a handful of players that we kind of see really lining up on opening day?
As any preseason roster that you look at, there are the handful of players that jump out that have been namesake starters, that have established themselves with a team. And when I look at this Houston Dash roster, the biggest one for me initially is Jane Campbell and Rachel Daly. Jane Campbell, goalkeeper. She's been with Houston. She's been in and out of the United States women's national team roster over the last few months, and especially last year. She's been a namestay there. And when she was gone, Lindsay Harris stepped in pretty seamlessly for Houston throughout that role. And then forward Rachel Daly, the English international, is such a phenomenal player for this Houston Dash team. She can create magic where there are no sparks at all. So those two definitely stand out. And because James Clarkson has been the head coach there and he remains the head coach, he knows these two players very, very well. And I believe that he is trying to build his team around players like this. Even when you look in the midfield, someone like a Sophie Schmidt, Shea Groom, he knows these players and what they can do on the field, what they can do together. And it's how he can complement those superstars by bringing in some new players, some different players from OL Reign that he's brought in. I think Katie Naughton in the backline defender, she had a great season in 2021. I think she'll solidify her spot and stay in that center back position. I think it depends who's going to slot in next to her. Megan, formerly Oyster, used to slot into that role. Abby Dahlkemper was there for a bit. We know Haley Hansen has done a number on the backline for Houston, but I think that the back line is a little bit of question marks when you look at this group of 8 that is listed on the roster. Besides Katie Naughton, it's kind of like, who can you build around her that will create? And it also depends on what Houston is trying to play. I mean, that's the biggest question for all of these clubs. But we know James Clarkson. We know a kind of soccer that Houston likes to play. They like to be patient with the ball, build it up, and then look to go quickly in transition. Are they going to stick with that, or are they going to change things up? But some big names: Jane Campbell, Katie Naughton on the back line. I think Shea Groom in the midfield, and forwards Rachel Daly, like I called out before. And I think Maria Sanchez, right? You wouldn't bring a player like that in, making a huge 2-year signing right at the start of the offseason for a player like Maria Sanchez if you're not going to play her and look to utilize the skills that she is bringing to the game.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I think across this preseason roster, there's maybe anywhere from 6 to 8, right, players that you could say are possibly locks to see on opening day for an ideal starting 11, which kind of means that there's room for opportunity here. There's opportunity here for players to try to show what they've got to their coaching staff to sort of make a case, right, for snatching a kind of a starting 11 spot. And I would like to see it, right? Maybe let's take a look at a potential who's our like I would be on our top prospect list or our young prospect list to maybe make a name for themselves and wrangle away a starting 11 spot.
For me, it's Makome Gomera-Stevens. She's a forward midfielder. She plays both. She played forward in college. Now she plays midfield for Houston Dash. She was with the club last year, played a little bit, 13 games. She got 4 starts, but it was during that Olympic stretch is really when she got to see a lot more time on the field when a lot of the internationals were out. She's a Hawaii native, product out of Washington State, that has a lot of good qualities under herself. She can really cross the ball in. She can dribble with speed. She can be creative. She likes to go towards the flank, but she can also cut inside. And we saw glimpses of what Makome Gomera-Stevens could do in 2021 with this Houston team. And if she can play in the midfield alongside players like Shea Groom, Sophie Schmidt, underneath players like Rachel Daly up top, even Nichelle Prince up top with so much speed, I think that Makome Gomera-Stevens could have a breakout year this year. She needs to lean into that, absorb everything like a sponge. She had a whole season with James Clarkson last year where she was with him every single day in training and could understand what he wants specifically from her. And now it's time to show the consistency that Gomera-Stevens can do. She did it in college. She came to the professional level. Can she do it now? This could be a breakout year for Gomera-Stevens. But there's still a lot of experience on this Houston Dash squad. And Sandra, when you look at the list of names on the roster, a lot of them have been with Houston over the last few years, but which experienced player needs to step up this year? Which one is the team going to rely on to help take them all the way in 2022?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I love the way you phrased that too. I mean, we've been running into that a little bit with these previews. We've done team previews for clubs where we talked a lot about their preseason roster as a whole and notice that there's a lot of new faces in the mix, and not just new faces but younger players. You're talking out of draft players when we did it with Orlando Pride already, with Racing Louisville, even throwing North Carolina in the mix a little bit with a ton of these newer and younger faces. But for Houston, that's not necessarily a similar case, right? While there's new faces, these a lot of the acquisitions that they may tend to have a little bit more experience in the league. I think it's going to be beneficial. But for someone who has already been with the club for a little bit of time now, and I think is going to end up being that sort of essential experienced player that the club leans on, I got to look in the midfield and I got to look at Shea Groom. I think it's maybe you look at the sort of midfield core in place that they have, and maybe it's easy to look at somebody like a Sophie Schmidt, right, who's been an absolute linchpin for them in the midfield, has had to clean up things, has had to spearhead things for the club in that middle third. But I'm absolutely looking at Shea Groom to sort of take on that little bit of a veteran role, more experienced player role in light of of the new faces, maybe not the young prospect faces, but the new faces that are coming in to this Houston Dash side, maybe looking to get established and sort of figuring out what it means to be a member of the Houston Dash, what it means to sort of be part of the culture that they have sort of built over the course of Clarkson's tenure with the team. And she's someone who has been relied upon at times to sort of be a little bit of a pest on the pitch, right, for Houston Dash, and you kind of have to have that person at times during the match. And she's someone that I could see absolutely sort of taking a game by the scruff of the neck and saying, "Hey, let's go." And I think there might be some moments during the 2022 season in an expanded year with 2 additional clubs where the competition's going to look and feel a little bit different. They're going to have to maybe rely on some experience, and I think they're going to maybe get that from Shea Groom. And this is also